here it is from yesterday. This is all dried from the first coat last night. Oh, really crisp. Okay, second coat. It is about 12 o'clock and I'm going to go out and add the second layer of oil to the decking. That takes about 2 to 6 hours to dry. That's what it says on the tin, depending on conditions. Since it's so sunny, I'm going to assume that it will take a little bit less time to dry today. But I'm going to go and check it in about 3 hours time and see how it's getting on. If it's dry, I will board it back up and it'll be ready to put the hot tub on. Really frustratingly, when I took this particular piece off that was around the back, it was wedged in there quite tightly. I probably could have made these gaps a tiny bit wider because the wood has expanded, and that's why it was hard to get off. And this piece goes on there, so it fell off. But it's fine, I'll glue it back on and we'll be none the wiser. As you know, mistakes happen. Not only do mistakes happen, mistakes can be solved. So I've just picked myself up some wood glue. And I'm going to glue it on both sides. I'm going to smudge it around with my finger. And then I'm going to clamp these two bits together. And then nobody has to know. You'll know and I'll know, but nobody else has to know. So don't tell anyone. After it's clamped together, I just use my fingers to wipe off any excess glue because I don't want that to dry on there in big blobs. Now for a little close-up of what I was doing. I'm just adding some random blobs. As I said, I'm smudging it around with my finger. This is the level of detail that you didn't need because I already told you, but the truth is I breathe so loudly and so I have to talk over that part so you can't hear me breathing. Weirdly self-conscious about it. I picked up these clamps when I was in Derby. I was doing a talk up there in a museum all about DIY, and afterwards I did a workshop with some of the participants and I realised I'd completely forgotten to bring any clamps, so I had to rush out and pick these up. The closest hardware store was about 2 miles, so that was a fun walk from the town centre. Anyone else use their arms to store excess glue? The next thing I did was to peel off all of these price stickers. For the one I'm pointing at just there, it shouldn't really be there at all because I probably should have used my saw to cut off the very end so that it was a bit smoother. But on these ones that are made up of the pergola at the top, it's a bit more difficult to do that because the shape is already there. A few hours later, the glue had dried and the second coat of oil had also dried on the decking. So it was time for me to put them back on. But then I remembered that I also wanted to seal the actual frame of the deck itself with some oil, so I removed all of these pieces, popped them here out of the way, very careful not to fall into the gaps, which is easier done than you might expect. I also used this last opportunity to make sure that I was happy with the location of the breeze blocks underneath the deck. I wanted to install a few, I think there's 5 that I installed in the end as extra support. Not just because a hot tub is very, very heavy when it's filled with water, but also because it's very heavy when filled with water and with 4 people. I didn't need to be too tidy with this because it was only going to drip down the sides, but I did make sure to clear up any drips on the front that I would see. I left it again for another few hours for that oil to dry up before adding these bits back on. One of the good things about adding these back on in this way is that they're now in a random order, which means that any of the previous markings from the hot tub that you might have just about been able to see on the deck are now invisible because they're all out of order and you can't see any sort of line. I roughly placed the middle decking boards on and then went to add on these extra bits at the side. These are 2 of the hardest bits to get around the post. Firstly, because in the one that I'm doing now, there's a screw in the wall that is in just the most awkward place and I can't move it. So I have to wiggle the board behind the screw and very gently rest it down, which is tricky to do because The board itself has those odd angles at the end, and as you saw, I just glued them back together, so I wanted to be extra careful with that. I'm going to start with this very front piece because this is quite easy to attach. It just butts up against the post, so I know exactly where it needs to be, and I can use this as a guide to make sure the rest of them are all straight. Watchy watchy, watchy watchy. Before I installed the decking boards, I thought I would attach this piece that I cut earlier and didn't attach. I just used some decking screws for this. I want to screw all of the boards into the beams underneath, and I want them to look straight. And it can be quite easy to very slowly start to screw them in ever so slightly off centre, and then all of a sudden you've got a really wonky line. So I got some duct tape and I taped some tape onto the deck where the beams were to get a nice straight line with my screws. I was feeling quite smug about this idea. I definitely thought I was very smart, but I've not tried it before, so I don't know if it's going to work. I guess we can try this out together. I also decided to oil the very top of the pergola, and because of that, lots of oil was dripping down onto my clothes, which I didn't want, so I thought I would put on my Spidey gear, which, as you can see by the absolute state of it, I often use if I'm doing messy work and I don't want to get it on my nice new clothes. I have 15 decking boards, and I have 7 different beams that I need to screw into. Each one has 2 screws. That means I had a total of 210 screws to install into this decking. And it's the kind of job that you think won't take very long, but it really does. It really, really does. Because not only did I have to screw the decking screws in, I also had to pre-drill some pilot holes. And every single time I drilled a hole, I stopped to make sure that I was happy with the width away from the edge of the board, that it was still in line with the other screw holes before and after. And it really, really takes a long time. You know what this reminds me of? I completely re-floorboarded my entire house, all of the top floor and the living room downstairs. This was because even though my house was mostly floorboarded, there was lots of areas where there weren't any floorboards at all, or it had been replaced with chipboard and it looked hideous, and I wanted it to be fully floorboarded. So I got some second-hand floorboards from a Victorian house, fairly close to where I live, who was giving them up, and I re-floorboarded the entire house. But again, that was hundreds and hundreds worth of screwing, pre-drilling pilot holes, and in that occasion it wasn't actually screws, I used nails, so lots and lots of hammering, a very sore hand after I finished. But I did finish drilling in all of these screws today, which means that the deck is now fully down and is ready for the hot tub. Oh, and by the way, the tape and string method, it didn't really help at all, just so you know. I gave it one final brush before I turned in for the night, and didn't want to miss the opportunity to hang off the pergola like Spider-Man does. If you want to see more DIY vlogs, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel.